The strange thing about thieves is that they always think they're the smartest person on the property, right up until the property starts thinking for itself. The sound hit me before I even opened my eyes. A deep, angry bray rolled across the orchard at 4:17 in the morning, rattling the old window above my bed. Then came another one. Longer this time. Louder. The kind of sound that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up because you know something isn't right. I threw on my boots and stepped onto the porch. The cold spring air smelled like damp soil, crushed grass, and ripe apples hanging heavy on the trees. Motion lights flashed across the eastern side of the orchard. White beams cut through the darkness between rows of red delicious trees planted by my grandfather nearly 60 years ago. Then I heard a voice. "Somebody help me!" It was a woman. Panicked. Echoing through the orchard. I grabbed my flashlight and headed downhill. Gravel crunched beneath my boots while the lights continued blinking on and off. The orchard stretched across 15 acres behind my farmhouse, rolling down toward a creek that marked the edge of my property. Every tree, every fence post, every irrigation line carried a memory. My grandfather planted the first 100 trees after returning home from the Korean War. My father expanded the orchard. And after both of them were gone, keeping it alive became my responsibility. As I rounded the corner near the southern rows, the beam from my flashlight landed on something I never expected to see. Brenda Whitmore. HOA President. Real estate agent. Self-appointed ruler of Willow Creek Estates. She was sitting on a thick tree branch about 8 feet off the ground, clutching the trunk with both arms. Her expensive designer jacket was snagged on a limb. Her shoes were covered in mud. A canvas picking bag hung from one shoulder, overflowing with apples. Below her stood Duke. 4,500 pounds of stubborn determination packed into one gray guard donkey. His ears were pinned forward. His eyes never left Brenda. 20 feet away stood Molly, blocking the only clear path back toward the subdivision gate. Neither animal looked aggressive. They simply stood there, watching. Waiting. Guarding their territory exactly the way they had been trained to do since they were young. "Ethan!" Brenda yelled when she spotted me. "Get these animals away from me!" I stopped walking and looked around. Apples covered the ground beneath the tree. Fresh footprints cut through the dew-soaked grass. The subdivision's rear access gate stood wide open in the distance. And above all of it, mounted on a pole near the irrigation pump, a security camera quietly blinked red. Recording everything. Backing it up automatically to cloud storage. Every second. Every excuse. Every lie. The smell of crushed apples drifted through the cool air as Brenda tightened her grip on the branch, and Duke let out another thunderous bray that echoed across the valley. What Brenda didn't know was that this wasn't the first time apples had disappeared from my orchard. And before the sun came up that morning, her very expensive mistake was about to become everyone's business. I wish I could tell you that morning was the first time Brenda Whitmore had caused trouble in my life, but the truth is she had been circling my orchard for almost 2 years before she ever ended up stranded in one of my apple trees. My name is Ethan Walker, and I own Walker Orchard, a 15-acre apple farm tucked against the edge of Willow Creek Estates in western Pennsylvania. Most people who drive past see rows of trees and a weathered red barn. They smell fresh apples in the fall and think it looks peaceful. And most days it is. The orchard has been part of my family longer than I have been alive. My grandfather bought the land in 1958 after returning from military service. Back then it was nothing but rolling hills, stubborn soil, and a dream. He planted the first trees himself. Every winter he pruned them by hand. Every spring he worried about frost. Every harvest season he worked until his hands were cracked and stained from the fruit. My father inherited that same work ethic. When I was a kid, I spent weekends riding beside him on an old tractor that sounded like it was held together with hope and rust. Even now, I can still remember the smell of diesel mixing with apple blossoms during April mornings. After my father passed away, the orchard became my responsibility. Some people inherit money. I inherited responsibility. And honestly, I would not trade it for anything. The place paid my bills, raised my daughter Lily, and gave me a purpose when life became difficult. That is why I never understood people like Brenda. She moved into Willow Creek Estates about 6 years ago. At first she seemed friendly enough. She waved during community events. She smiled at neighbors. She talked endlessly about improving property values and protecting the character of the neighborhood. But over time that smile started feeling less genuine. It became obvious that Brenda viewed everything through the lens of real estate commissions and resale prices. If something could not increase property values, she considered it a problem. My orchard became one of those problems. The complaints started small. Too many visitors during fall weekends. Too much traffic near the entrance road. Bees from my pollination boxes drifting near the subdivision. The smell of fertilizer during planting season. The sound of tractors before 8 in the morning. Every few months another complaint appeared. Every complaint failed. County inspectors visited. Agricultural officials reviewed everything. The orchard passed every inspection without issue. That only seemed to frustrate Brenda more. The funny thing is that my grandfather predicted people like her decades ago. He used to sit on the farmhouse porch drinking coffee from a chipped ceramic mug while watching Duke and Molly patrol the property. Well, not these exact donkeys. Their predecessors. We have always kept guard donkeys on the farm. One evening when I was 12 years old I asked why. He laughed and pointed toward the pasture. Then he told me something I never forgot. People think guard dogs protect property, he said. Donkeys protect territory. Once they decide something belongs here, they take their job seriously. At the time I thought he was joking. Years later, standing in my orchard watching Brenda cling to a tree branch while Duke stared her down from below, those words came rushing back to me. Because what happened that morning was not random. It was the result of months of growing tension, weeks of missing fruit, and one woman making the mistake of believing that someone else's hard work belonged to her. The more I learned about Brenda Whitmore, the more I realized the orchard itself was never her real problem. Apples were just an excuse. Bees were an excuse. Tractors were an excuse. The real issue sat about half a mile east of my property line where Willow Creek Estates ended and open farmland began. About 8 months before that morning in the orchard, rumors started floating around town. A regional developer out of Pittsburgh was looking for land. Not a few lots. Not a small subdivision. They wanted hundreds of acres for a luxury housing project. The kind with decorative stone entrances, artificial ponds, walking trails, and marketing brochures full of smiling families who somehow never seemed to sweat. Most people ignored the rumors. Small towns generate rumors the way orchards generate leaves. But one afternoon I stopped by the local diner after delivering a shipment of apples to a grocery distributor. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the room while farmers argued about weather forecasts near the counter. That was where I overheard something interesting. 2 surveyors were talking about property maps spread across a table. One name kept coming up. Willow Creek Expansion Project. At the center of the proposed development sat a large green area that interrupted every layout. My orchard. I remember studying the map for only a few seconds before one of the surveyors folded it away. But that was enough. Every version of the project required access through land that belonged to me. A few weeks later, the first offer arrived. A polite letter. A generous number. More money than my grandfather ever dreamed of seeing. I declined. Then another offer came. Then another. Each one larger than the last. My answer never changed. The orchard was not for sale. That should have ended the conversation. Instead, it seemed to start a completely different one. Around that same time, Brenda became unusually interested in my property. She started attending county planning meetings. She suddenly had opinions about agricultural land use. She talked constantly about modernization and community growth. During one homeowners association meeting, she stood in front of a room full of residents and described the farmland surrounding the subdivision as underutilized space. Underutilized. I remember hearing that word and almost laughing. Every acre of that orchard produced fruit, jobs, and income. There was nothing underutilized about it. But Brenda saw things differently. To her, trees were not trees. They were future building lots. The complaints intensified after that. Every month seemed to bring something new. One week she claimed orchard traffic was creating safety concerns. The next week she insisted fallen apples attracted wildlife. Then came letters from attorneys representing concerned residents. Strangely, most of those residents later told me they had never signed anything. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Someone wanted pressure. Someone wanted inconvenience. Someone wanted me tired enough to accept an offer and walk away. The funny thing was that the orchard was actually having one of its best years. The trees were loaded. Branches bent under the weight of fruit. The air smelled sweet every morning. Customers were already calling to reserve cider and baked goods for the upcoming harvest festival. Business should have been booming. Yet every time I looked toward Willow Creek Estates, I felt the tension growing. Like thunder building beyond the horizon before a storm. Then the apples started disappearing. At first it was small enough to dismiss. A missing basket here. A few missing rows there. But by late summer, entire sections were being picked before harvest crews arrived. Somebody was entering the property regularly. Somebody was helping themselves to fruit that took an entire year to grow. And although I did not know exactly how deep Brenda was involved yet, I had a feeling the missing apples were connected to something much bigger than simple theft. The first real sign that somebody had moved beyond complaints and into deliberate sabotage showed up on a Monday morning in late August. The sun had barely cleared the hills when I noticed something strange near the northern rows. The grass was flattened in long tracks between the trees. Fresh tire marks cut through the dew. A plastic irrigation valve sat broken beside the path. Water hissed into the air, spraying across the orchard like a fountain. The smell of wet soil mixed with ripe fruit as I shut the line off and stared at the damage. It was not catastrophic, but it was expensive. More importantly, it was intentional. Equipment does not simply drive itself into irrigation systems. Somebody had entered the property after dark. Somebody wanted to create problems. Over the next few weeks, the incidents multiplied. Fence sections were left unlatched. Orchard signs disappeared. Newly planted saplings were found bent over or uprooted. One morning I arrived at the roadside stand to discover anonymous flyers scattered across the parking area. The papers warned customers about supposed agricultural contamination and unsafe farming practices. None of it was true. Every claim was nonsense. Still, people notice rumors. Even ridiculous rumors have a way of sticking around once they are released into the world. The most frustrating part was how carefully everything was designed. No single incident caused enough damage to trigger a major investigation. No single act looked serious by itself. But together they formed a pattern. 1,000 tiny cuts aimed at one goal. Making life difficult enough that I would eventually give up. The Harvest Festival was only 6 weeks away. Normally that was my favorite time of year. Families would fill the orchard. Children would ride hay wagons. Local musicians would perform near the barn. The smell of fresh cider and cinnamon donuts would drift through the property from sunrise until evening. It was the event that kept the business profitable through winter. This year reservations started slowing down. Customers called asking questions about things they had heard online. Some canceled entirely. Every time it happened, I found myself thinking about Brenda. Not because I had proof. Not yet. But because her fingerprints seemed to be everywhere. She always appeared whenever a new complaint surfaced. She always seemed to know details before anyone else. And she had become unusually vocal about how the community would benefit if the orchard were replaced with modern housing. Then came the county meeting. I still remember the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and the smell of stale coffee in the conference room. Residents gathered to discuss local development proposals. Brenda stood near the front with several homeowners association board members. When it was her turn to speak, she launched into a polished presentation about growth, modernization, and responsible land use. Then she pointed directly toward a map that included my property. According to Brenda, The orchard represented a barrier to economic progress. She called it outdated, inefficient, underperforming. Listening to her describe 3 generations of my family's work as an inconvenience was almost impressive. Not because it was convincing, because she sounded like she actually believed it. After the meeting ended, I stepped outside into the warm evening air. The parking lot smelled like hot asphalt after a long summer day. As I walked toward my truck, one of the county employees caught up with me. He glanced around before lowering his voice. Then he told me something that immediately changed how I viewed the entire situation. The development company had recently increased its land acquisition budget significantly. Certain people stood to earn very large commissions if surrounding properties became available. I thanked him and drove home in silence. The sunset painted the orchard gold when I pulled into the driveway. Duke and Molly were grazing near the fence. The trees were heavy with fruit. Everything looked peaceful. Yet standing there, I finally understood what I was dealing with. This was never about noise complaints. It was never about bees or traffic or property values. Somebody wanted the orchard gone. And they were becoming more desperate every week. After that conversation in the parking lot, I stopped treating the missing apples like a nuisance and started treating them like evidence. The next morning I walked every section of the orchard before sunrise. A thin layer of fog hung between the rows. The air smelled sweet from fruit nearing harvest. Dew clung to the leaves, sparkling under the first hints of daylight. At first glance everything looked normal. Then I reached the western edge near the subdivision boundary. Fresh footprints. Not one set. Several. The grass had been flattened along a narrow route leading toward a service gate that separated my property from a maintenance path behind Willow Creek Estates. I crouched beside the tracks and felt my stomach tighten. Whoever was coming into the orchard knew exactly where they were going. They avoided the main roads. They stayed close to tree cover. They entered, collected fruit, and left. This was no random trespasser. The pattern continued throughout the week. Every morning more apples were gone. Not damaged. Not fallen. Picked clean. Entire sections that should have supplied local stores suddenly produced half their expected yield. The losses started adding up fast. One afternoon I sat inside the packing barn reviewing inventory sheets while the hum of refrigeration units echoed through the building. Numbers never lie. By the end of August, thousands of dollars worth of fruit had vanished. That was when I installed additional cameras. Not obvious ones. Small weatherproof units tucked into fence posts, mounted inside bird boxes, hidden near irrigation equipment. Every camera backed up automatically to cloud storage. If somebody wanted to enter my orchard, I wanted a front row seat. 3 nights later I got exactly that. My phone buzzed at 2:13 in the morning. Motion alert. I rolled out of bed and opened the security app. The image appeared instantly. A golf cart moved slowly between the trees. Flashlights swept across branches heavy with apples. My pulse quickened as the camera angle shifted. There were 3 people. 2 men and 1 woman. They carried picking bags and moved with practiced confidence. Like they had done it before. Then the woman stepped into clearer view beneath a security light. Even through the grainy nighttime footage, I recognized her immediately. Brenda Whitmore. She was not inspecting property. She was not filing complaints. She was not protecting community standards. She was filling bags with apples from my orchard in the middle of the night. I watched in silence as the group worked their way down the row. They laughed. They pointed toward trees. One of the men loaded fruit into containers stacked on the golf cart. What shocked me most was not the theft itself. It was how comfortable they looked doing it. Like they believed the orchard already belonged to them. The next several nights revealed even more. Different cameras captured different angles. Sometimes Brenda arrived with board members from the Homeowners Association. Sometimes she came with people I did not recognize. Once I watched them break young branches while reaching for fruit. Another time they dragged containers across newly planted ground, crushing irrigation markers I had installed only weeks earlier. Every clip added another piece to the puzzle. Then I discovered something that made the entire situation worse. A local resident forwarded me screenshots from a neighborhood social media group. Brenda had been posting photographs of apples taken from my orchard. She claimed they came from community harvesting efforts. She implied the orchard was underperforming because I lacked proper management. She even suggested portions of the land should eventually be repurposed for community development. Reading those posts felt like swallowing gravel. She was stealing from the orchard while simultaneously using the stolen fruit as proof that the orchard should not exist. That was the moment I realized this was no longer about missing produce. This was a coordinated effort to undermine the business itself. And if Brenda was willing to go this far before harvest season, I had a feeling something much bigger was coming next. For the first time since taking over the orchard, I considered calling an attorney immediately. Not because I lacked evidence. By that point I had more than enough evidence. The problem was timing. Every instinct told me that Brenda and the people working with her were building towards something larger. The thefts were increasing. The online rumors were spreading. The pressure campaign against the orchard was becoming more organized. If I exposed everything too early, they would simply stop, deny responsibility, and disappear before revealing what they were actually planning. So I did something that surprised even me. I waited. I documented everything. Every morning started with coffee and security footage. Every evening ended with another review of camera recordings. The more I watched, the clearer the pattern became. They almost always entered through the same rear access gate connecting the subdivision maintenance path to the edge of my property. The gate itself did not belong to me. It belonged to the homeowners association. More specifically, it fell under Brenda's authority as president. And there was one detail that kept appearing in nearly every recording. After entering, Brenda routinely left the gate standing open behind her. At first I assumed it was carelessness. Then I realized it was habit. She never expected consequences because she never expected anyone to notice. Around the same time, the harvest festival preparations were entering full swing. Delivery trucks arrived daily. Volunteers helped clean the barn. Fresh signs went up along county roads. The smell of apple cider drifted through the property as test batches rolled out of the processing room. Under normal circumstances, it would have been my favorite part of the year. Instead, I spent most of my time putting out fires. One afternoon, a longtime customer called to cancel a large order for an upcoming event. She sounded uncomfortable during the conversation. Eventually, she admitted that several people online were claiming the orchard had failed inspections. Another customer asked whether reports of contamination were true. A local business owner wondered if future development might force the orchard to close permanently. None of it was real. Yet every rumor required time and energy to correct. That was the brilliance of what Brenda was doing. She was not attacking the orchard directly. She was attacking confidence. Confidence takes years to build and only moments to damage. Then came the meeting that confirmed my suspicions. A neighbor named Frank stopped by one evening just before sunset. Frank had lived in Willow Creek Estates for nearly a decade. He was the type of man who preferred fishing to gossip, which meant he only shared information when it mattered. We stood beside the fence while Duke and Molly grazed nearby. The air smelled like fresh-cut grass and apples warming in the late afternoon sun. Frank lowered his voice and told me that several homeowners association board members had recently attended private meetings with representatives from the development company. According to what he heard, new financial projections assumed that my orchard would eventually become available for acquisition. Not might become available. Would become available. Someone was acting as if the outcome had already been decided. That conversation changed everything. Up until then, I believed Brenda wanted to pressure me into selling. Now I realized she may have already promised someone that the land would become available. The thefts, the rumors, the complaints, the damage, all of it suddenly fit together. They were not trying to negotiate. They were trying to manufacture failure. Standing there beside the fence, watching the evening sunlight spill across rows of trees planted by my grandfather, I made a decision. I was finished reacting. From that moment forward, I would let them continue exactly as they had been. I would not confront them. I would not warn them. I would not even change the gate they kept using. Instead, I would keep recording, keep documenting, and keep waiting. Because sooner or later, people who believe they are untouchable always make one mistake too many. The week before the Harvest Festival felt strangely calm, and that alone made me suspicious. After months of complaints, missing fruit, anonymous rumors, and nighttime visits, the sudden silence felt unnatural. Brenda stopped posting online. The Homeowners Association stopped filing reports. Even the steady stream of complaints that had become part of my routine seemed to disappear overnight. Most people would have welcomed the peace. I did not. I had spent too many mornings reviewing security footage to believe the situation had magically resolved itself. People do not abandon a campaign after investing that much effort. They regroup. They adjust. They look for a bigger opportunity. That was exactly what I believed was happening. The orchard was entering peak harvest season. The trees were loaded with fruit. Every branch seemed to sag beneath the weight of bright red apples. The smell of ripe fruit drifted across the property from sunrise until evening. Delivery schedules were packed. Festival reservations were stronger than ever despite the rumors. In many ways, the orchard had survived the worst of the pressure campaign. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, I found myself paying even closer attention. Every camera was operational. Every backup system had been tested. Motion alerts were configured across the entire property. I even upgraded the cloud storage account to ensure nothing would be lost. If somebody decided to make one final move, I wanted every second preserved. Around the same time, I noticed something else. The rear access gate kept appearing in my camera footage. Not people. Just the gate itself. Open one day. Closed the next. Open again a few days later. Someone was checking access routes. Someone was preparing. One evening after finishing repairs near the barn, I drove a utility vehicle down to the southern boundary line. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the orchard in gold and orange light. Duke and Molly grazed nearby. Both animals appeared completely relaxed. They wandered slowly between rows, occasionally stopping beneath the trees. Watching them always reminded me of my grandfather. He trusted those animals more than most people. As I parked beside the fence, I noticed fresh tire tracks near the maintenance path again. Not old tracks. Fresh ones. The kind left by a golf cart after recent use. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared toward the subdivision. That was when I became convinced something was coming. The next several days only reinforced the feeling. More online discussion appeared about future development opportunities. A local resident mentioned hearing that investors would be visiting the area soon. Another neighbor claimed certain homeowners association members were unusually confident about expansion plans. It was as if some people already believed the orchard's future had been decided. The confidence bothered me. Confidence without evidence usually comes from assumptions. Confidence with evidence comes from plans. Then, 3 nights before the festival, one of the cameras captured something interesting. Shortly after midnight, the rear gate opened. Nobody entered. Nobody crossed the property line. The camera simply recorded the gate being unlocked, opened, and left standing wide open before closing again several minutes later. A test run. That was my conclusion. Somebody wanted to verify access before attempting something larger. I reviewed the footage several times and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because I was happy. Because the mistake was exactly what I had been waiting for. Whoever was behind the operation had become comfortable. Comfortable people stop being careful. Comfortable people begin taking shortcuts. Comfortable people believe success is inevitable. I decided not to change a thing. The gate remained exactly as it was. The cameras continued recording. The orchard continued operating. And every evening, as the smell of apples drifted through the cool autumn air, I found myself remembering my grandfather's words more often. Donkeys protect territory. Not because they are aggressive. Not because they are unpredictable. Because they notice when something does not belong. Standing on the porch the night before the festival, looking across rows of trees glowing beneath the moonlight, I had a feeling that somebody was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The only question was how much evidence they would leave behind when they did. At 1:52 in the morning, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I opened my eyes immediately. Another motion alert. The screen illuminated the dark bedroom as I reached for it. One glance at the security feed told me everything I needed to know. The rear access gate was open again. This time there was no hesitation. 3 figures entered the orchard carrying large picking bags and portable containers. A golf cart followed a minute later. The headlights remained off, but the infrared cameras captured every detail. I sat up and watched silently. Brenda was there. So were the same 2 men who had appeared in previous recordings. They moved confidently between the rows, stopping beneath some of the most productive trees on the property. The orchard was completely quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves in the cool autumn breeze. From the camera view, they probably believed they were alone. What they did not know was that 12 cameras were recording simultaneously from different angles while every second uploaded directly to cloud storage. I poured a cup of coffee and continued watching. There was no reason to rush outside. The evidence was collecting itself. For nearly 30 minutes the group worked their way deeper into the orchard. Picking bags filled. Containers stacked higher. The golf carts slowly accumulated more fruit than most families would eat in months. Then something familiar happened. Brenda opened the rear gate again and left it standing wide open. Just like always. Habit. Carelessness. Confidence. Whatever the reason, it became the detail that changed everything. Several minutes later, one of the cameras near the southern pasture captured movement. Duke lifted his head first. Molly noticed a few seconds later. Neither animal reacted dramatically. They simply became alert. Their attention shifted toward activity that clearly did not belong there. The footage almost looked comical. 3 people sneaking through an orchard believing they controlled the situation, while 2 guard donkeys quietly observed from a distance. The next 20 minutes turned into absolute chaos, though not the kind anyone planned. Startled by the sudden appearance of the animals, the group abandoned any remaining attempt to look calm. One man dropped a picking bag. Another hurried toward the golf cart. Brenda moved deeper between the trees before realizing she had gone the wrong direction. Apples rolled across the ground. Containers tipped over. Flashlights swung wildly through the darkness. At one point, Brenda climbed onto a low branch to avoid walking directly past Duke, who had decided that particular section of the orchard deserved close supervision. The scene looked less like a criminal operation and more like a group of people making increasingly poor decisions. Meanwhile, the cameras continued recording everything. Every dropped apple. Every abandoned container. Every attempt to explain the situation to each other. Eventually one of the men reached the golf cart and managed to turn it around. The other followed shortly afterward. Brenda remained stranded on the branch, loudly insisting that someone help her while refusing to climb back down. By then several neighboring properties had lights turning on. The noise had attracted attention. The entire situation was unraveling faster than any of them expected. That was when I finally stepped outside. The cold air carried the scent of apples and damp grass across the hillside as I walked toward the orchard with my flashlight. Motion lights flashed between the rows. The security cameras blinked quietly overhead. Duke stood beneath the tree. Molly blocked the easiest path toward the open gate. And there sat Brenda Whitmore, clutching a branch above a ground covered with apples she had no business collecting. Looking at the scene, I realized months of rumors, thefts, complaints, and sabotage had just reached their inevitable conclusion. Not because I had trapped anyone. Because they had spent so long believing they were untouchable that they eventually stopped thinking about consequences. By sunrise, the story had already started spreading across town. Not because I posted anything online. Not because I called reporters. The truth was much simpler. People talk. Especially in small towns. And when the president of a homeowners association spends the early hours of a fall morning explaining why she was sitting in an apple tree on somebody else's property with bags full of fruit, conversations tend to happen naturally. I spent that morning doing exactly what I had done every harvest season for years. I checked irrigation lines. I reviewed delivery schedules. I helped prepare for the festival. Meanwhile, copies of the security footage were safely stored in multiple locations. Every camera angle. Every entry through the gate. Every nighttime visit. Every missing apple. Every broken branch. Every false rumor suddenly looked very different when placed beside months of recorded evidence. Within days, the Homeowners Association board held an emergency meeting. Several members resigned. Others claimed they had been misled about what was happening. The development company that had shown interest in surrounding land quietly stepped away from conversations involving the orchard. Apparently, investors become nervous when community leaders appear in security footage collecting property that does not belong to them. County officials reviewed complaints that had been filed against the orchard and found no violations. Independent inspections confirmed exactly what I had been saying all along. The farm was operating properly. The fruit was healthy. The business was legitimate. All those months of accusations collapsed almost overnight. The biggest surprise came from the community itself. Customers who had canceled orders returned. Families who had heard the rumors showed up in record numbers for the Harvest Festival. Local businesses offered support. One restaurant even created a special apple dessert named after the orchard. By the end of the weekend, attendance had exceeded every previous year in our history. The parking fields were full. Children ran between rows of trees carrying cider donuts. Live music echoed from the barn. The smell of fresh apples and cinnamon drifted across the property from morning until sunset. Standing near the entrance, watching hundreds of people enjoy the place my grandfather built, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Relief. Not because I had won some battle. Because the truth had finally caught up with the lies. A few weeks later, I installed a new sign near the southern boundary. It sat beside the same access route where so many problems had started. The sign was simple. No threats. No warnings. Just a reminder. Beneath the painted apple logo, it read, "Protected by donkeys and documentation." Visitors laughed when they saw it. Neighbors took photographs. Even the sheriff smiled when he drove past. As for Duke and Molly, they returned to their normal routines as if none of it had ever happened. They wandered the orchard. They grazed beneath the trees. They watched the property with the same quiet attention they always had. Looking back, I think about something my grandfather told me all those years ago while sitting on the farmhouse porch. At the time, I thought it was a joke. Now I understand exactly what he meant. Donkeys do not protect apples. They do not protect fences. They do not protect buildings. They protect territory. And on the night when months of greed, shortcuts, and bad decisions finally collided with reality, they did exactly what they had always been meant to do. They noticed something that did not belong. Everything that happened afterward was simply the truth finding its way into the daylight.